All right, everybody. Welcome to the November 14th occurrence of the Gateway API Gamma meeting. As a reminder, this meeting is governed by the Kubernetes. Yes, that's right, the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. So please make sure you're nice and respectful to everybody. That's just a general rule as well. As was just noted, we do have an open agenda, so that you can find that here in the chat of the meeting. So feel free to add a topic for us to discuss. There isn't currently a topic there, but looks like Mike is adding one. Let me share my screen so people can see what is happening on said meeting notes. That's probably helpful.
I'd just like to point out that Kim Schaefer has the best organization name I've seen in quite some time. That's very cool.
Yes. While we get some of the agenda populated, if we have new folks who maybe it's your first time joining or just joined recently, if you'd like, we'd love for you to let us know who you are. Say hi if you're willing to.
Yeah, this is my first time here, so Craig Brooks, working with Red Hat and particularly working on the upstream project called Quadrant. So yeah, glad to be here.
Nice.
Welcome, glad to have you. Anyone else? All right. Well, feel free to come off of mute and say hi any other time. All right. So we've got a couple of meeting notes here. Looks like Craig, you've out and had a prompt the first day, so I'm going to go with Craig. You want to talk about consensus around adding names to HTTP route rule and route match?
Yeah, so Guy is my colleague, and he wasn't able to make this call, so I jumped in on his behalf. But we're quite interested in getting this GEP progressed, and I'm wondering if there's consensus around the value of it at this point, and is the next step, what is the next step to try and progress it? So.
Yeah, I see it's been this issue. It's been around for almost 2 years at this point. There was a PR at some point. It looks like some discussions kind of kicked back off around July and August. I see Mike and Shane have some recent context here, and you want to give us a kind of update on where we left things and maybe give us a hint as to how to move forward. Any context you might have?
Take it away, Mike.
I just had to reorient myself with what my comment was. KubeCon was a bit of a blur interjection there. Yeah, so this seems like it's kind of like sat for a while, and we wanted to make sure there was like a viable use case attached to it. And I guess, yeah, the largest thing I saw was partial validity makes it difficult to message what parts of a route are valid or invalid in the status, because the status is for the entire route. So being able to specify names would be I think a step towards improving the kind of UX here. That's just one possible use case among others. And yeah, just like +1 to I think it was Nick's point that it has to be optional to avoid being breaking change. And then just, yeah, the chain, I think you're probably more familiar with like conventions around unset, empty, nil, things like that, and how we're handling that. But yeah, I'm generally +1 on this, and this seems relatively straightforward to move to implementable if it has broad support.
I'm sorry, I am catching myself back up on it. The whole context and all the comments have just vacated my brain. So.
Same, I had to like skim quick too, yeah.
Oh, I totally remembered everything about it. KubeCon totally didn't knock every stuff out of my brain. To me, I think the really important bit here is actually the one about mismatched section names. I think Mike's point about array-based indexing being way too easy to shoot ourselves in the foot. Yeah, a lot of agreement on that one there.
Cool.
I don't know that I really care very much what unset optional names look like, except that I'm you know,
I have no preference.
I
other
think
than
they
use
probably end up
other parts of
from
the API.
yeah, in Golang, I feel like the simple way to do that is to make them pointers to string and to be able to differentiate between nil and some bozo saying they have an empty name. But then you get questions about, okay, should we allow an empty name? Because that also seems silly. So
Yes, yes, yes. Now I'm starting to remember. So I read through down to 2 weeks ago, and this is ringing a bell. Guilherme Casalato works over at Quadrant at Red Hat,
right.
and they like need this basically to do Quadrant policies.
I feel like they talked about this at a recent Gateway API or
I think
Gamma
so,
meeting
yeah,
too.
exactly, exactly. And as I understood it, I thought Guilherme was going to kind of push it forward from here. So I think I'm going to comment on here, just be like, hey, I'm pretty, like, I'm almost positive we talked about him kind of taking it forward from here since their use case is so strong.
Yeah.
So I think the next step is just to check back in with him. He is not here to my,
I'm his
my knowledge.
colleague, so I can relay that. He wasn't able to
Okay.
join today, but I said I would join on his behalf.
Excellent.
So I can make that clear to him.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think at this
So-
point, I am pretty sure,
Does it,
but we probably
Craig,
need to
does it-
check that. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Shane.
I was just gonna say, I'm pretty sure Songzhu is not going to move this forward based on the date and everything. So it should be, I'll double check with him, but it should be good if Guilherme wants to take it and kind of start making the motions. Go ahead with what you're saying, Flynn.
Craig, I was going to ask if it works for your use case to I don't want to phrase this one. Yeah, so reading between the lines of what Mike was saying about array indexing and things like that, I feel like the impact of that on Quadrant is that y'all would end up needing to explicitly set names on all of your routes to do what you need. And does that work for y'all or not so much?
So I guess it depends. Like the use case there would be if you wanted to target a specific rule with a policy, then you would need to set a name in it, right? So that you could set the section name. Otherwise, if you didn't set the section name, it would be, well, we're not going to pay attention to any names in there. It's going to be applied to every object,
Right.
right. So I think that would work fine. That we could document, if you want to specifically target something, you need to set a name in it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, in that case, I think that it makes a reasonable amount of sense to let y'all go ahead and update the gap and keep pushing on it.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you very much.
Cool.
And feel free to ping me in Gateway API channel or DMs. I'm happy to like help support this and help move it forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mike.
Yep.
All right, excellent. Glad to see some movement happening here. As always, let us know if there is any assistance needed here. All right, any other comments or questions on this topic before we move on to the next topic? Awesome. In that case, Mike, you're up next with Next Step for Gamma.
All right. So yeah, I guess over the summer, I feel like a lot of attention has largely been focused on getting Gateway API to 1.0, which it happened. Woo! Exciting. Yeah, so kind of at KubeCon last week, I was talking with a few folks and trying to kind of like restart discussions around focus areas for Gamma and kind of like what we want to tackle next in this kind of like post 1.0 landscape. And the other half of that is Shane's next topic around maturing the existing things that we've gotten so far. Yeah, and I was talking
Do we
with
want to
Bill
swap the
about
order on
around-
these and talk about maturing and nailing down graduation criteria first and then get into what's next?
Sure, happy to do that.
I mean, Shane, what do you think? Since we're gonna
I
make you
mean,
talk
yeah,
about,
I can just like go right on top of what Mike was trying to say and just take over now. No,
Do it.
I'm feeling like one of these might be a little more open-ended than the other is why I asked.
Yeah,
Fair.
I think I can keep mine pretty straightforward, and then you can just go forward with yours, Mike.
Awesome.
I think we're at a point where it is important that we both harden down our graduation criteria and actually put a probation period down, like we've been doing. Like, I think these would be good things for the Gamma project to put some emphasis, some pressure on pushing it forward. I think that to act on that, it would be good if maybe, I don't know if we need to or want to do it as part of one of these meetings, but a few of us sit down and like do a separate Zoom where we specifically read things through and kind of do a brainstorming on or a grooming, if you want to think of it in that light, on the GEPs, so that we can put in the action of that brainstorming session be PRs that actually update the graduation criteria, the probation, what kind of timeline we think we're looking at to get through the graduation criteria. Once that's done and we kind of know what's next, it will be a lot simpler to say, okay, now let's go find the people who will actually do this and get kind of owners on things, or champions, if you will. I don't know. It's all very procedural, but that's kind of my point, is just like, I think it's time to sit down, get together, actually write those up, like actually start looking at it and actually kind of set a timeline for ourselves for what's next. And then go ahead with what you think should be next.
Kind of like that idea.
Yeah, I agree.
Would be a part of that.
Yeah, I think one question I've got for implementations that are present, what kind of adoption have you seen from with respect to the Gamma spec? Because I know that's going to help give us feedback. So like, have we seen people start to use it? If they have used it, do we have feedback? Kind of where's that standing?
Last I knew, Kuma had no end user customer feedback. But we did have like what you might call like customer oriented engineers that had tried it, demos, stuff like that. So that's still something, that's still feedback. But that's, I think, as far as we've gotten. I'll check with Momot, who's not here right now, if there's anything more than that. But I think that's a fair characterization as where we're at with it. So
Linkerd has had, well, fair warning, this is not going to surprise anybody who talked to me about this at KubeCon or heard anything that I said at KubeCon, right? Linkerd has had a fair amount of interest from people who are wanting to switch. And the feedback is almost always, wait, what do you mean I can't compose retries and timeouts with this and things like that? So I don't think we have anybody who's actually using it in anger. I can do some checking on that. I know we have people who would like to use it in anger, but yeah, there's stuff where, and again, this isn't going to surprise anybody who heard me speaking at KubeCon. There's just stuff where Gateway API can't support it yet. And so that makes life hard for people who are really trying to use it. I should also point out there's an internal meeting for us to go through and hammer out a bunch of this crap about, so how do we want to manage this going forward, coming up later today. And so that's going to be a deeply fascinating conversation. I think it's also going to be a good conversation. Let me be clear about that, right? But it's going to be really interesting because, yeah, we really like the idea of having this. We like the idea of setting things up so that knowledge in this area can be more immediately transferable within the ecosystem. That's a huge win for anybody using Kubernetes. But we got to come up with a way to be able to support new features in a timely manner and to be able to do all the things that we've been able to do in the past as well. So
Yeah, I think that just to Shane's earlier point, I think hardening the core binding mechanisms and such is going to give us that foundation to be able to move more quickly when it comes to some of these other features for sure. Because
Or,
you know,
or
that's,
even if not necessarily more quickly, at least more predictably is a win all by itself. Don't get me wrong, I would love to see more quickly as well. And I'm addressing that to the Gamma co-leads, including myself. But you know, predictably is itself a big win. So
yeah, +1.
Yeah.
With respect to Istio, most of the support, or I'll say it like this, the Gamma support for Istio is most commonly highlighted in the ambient deployment topology. That's how folks add routes to their waypoints, is by binding to service in the Gamma, according to the Gamma spec. We've had some ambient feedback, not a lot of feedbacks that I know of around these binding mechanisms specifically. So, you know, the people we've talked to with ambient, none of made any kind of comment about the binding mechanics, which I guess is a good thing. As far as other usage, we've gotten some feedback on the ingress side of Istio Gateway API support, and on that in that front, that's more of like just wanting parity with Istio's native, you know, routing APIs. As far as Gamma though, I think the folks that want to use it are using it relatively fine, but there's not, from an Istio maintainer perspective, there's not enough in Gamma yet for us to pull the trigger and like start creating incentive for folks to use that as the primary, or to use Gamma as the primary routing API. Would love to have that incentive. I think we're kind of in the same boat as Linkerd in that sense. Like, we'd love to be able to have this become the default way in the ecosystem, but there's just, especially with Istio, there's so many things you can do with the Istio routing APIs that we'd just be leaving users with this gap if we pushed it too hard at this juncture. So
exactly. And you know, making things quicker and more predictable is going to help with that.
Yep.
Cool.
At least over time. I mean,
Yeah, Flynn, I am very interested in working with you to figure out how to make progress on getting retries into Gateway API.
I mean, yeah, great.
It's I believe that Envoy recently added support for the similar style as Linkerd uses. So
Yeah,
getting that into another implementation, such as Istio, would I think give the justification for like multiple implementations support the specific style. We have at least 2 styles, that and the like simple counting retries, and
we generally
making sure we structure it like extended conformance. If you do it, it's one of these 2 options. Pick one or more. I think there's a path for getting that in, and then I'd also love to coordinate more with Keith and figure out from Istio and other meshes like what's missing from making this a first-class API that everyone feels comfortable pushing their users towards.
So in the Envoy Gateway project, actually, sorry, let me back up. First, Shane, was there anything else specifically about graduation criteria and such that you wanted to talk about, since we're kind of veering off onto sort of things we could do next?
No. It was very much just a call out to let's get those written down.
Sounds good.
If somebody wants to actually set up an extra meeting to do that, or we could just reuse this, I'm open to whatever. But that's the only thing I wanted to make sure we did, was just like, let's actually follow up on that.
Keith, are you raising your hand to volunteer to set up the meeting? Or because you had something else you wanted to say?
Well, if I set up the meeting, it will probably be a Teams meeting automatically.
Oh,
I don't
God.
think
All
anybody
right,
here
let's not
wants
do that.
Oh, what meeting? What is
Microsoft Teams.
Huh?
Yeah. I've heard this term before. I don't, you know.
That's my way of getting out of meeting scheduling.
Microsoft Teams, isn't that an Xbox thing? What?
Hey,
No.
if the Google people can use Google Meets for stuff.
I'm just messing
Wait,
with
wait,
him.
what was that? There's some Google product that does what Zoom does? Did I hear that right?
Oh
Just
my
messing.
goodness. But no,
Um,
my
What,
hand was actually
seriously,
for
what
something
did, yeah,
different.
go ahead. Go
My
ahead.
hand was for some feedback that I got from Tim. I got a chance to snap Tim Hawken at KubeCon after his lightning talk, and he's still a little more than a little hesitant about binding to service. I think
yeah.
as part of the 080 release, we modified the language a bit to make it clear that service binding is not necessarily the only way that
Yep.
can happen. And I think that helps for a bit. He understands the constraints. He understands that binding to service is the only thing that you've got there. But I think for like a graduation type of conversation, I can anticipate Tim and even Cal, like SIGNet reviewers being a bit more concerned about having this now be a graduate, like a supported API within Kubernetes that we now have to
Well, you hit the nail
support
on
for
the
a long
head.
term.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head that, the effect of actually writing out further graduation criteria and kind of getting a timeline figured out, or rather not the effect, but the next step will be to run that by Tim and Cal.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason to do it. In fact, is we currently have basically no blessing. And we need to get to that point.
I think I might go a little further than basically no blessing, but
Yeah,
but I'm
but
trying
anyway.
to remember trying to remember exactly the language in that API review. And yeah, it was pretty clear that binding to service was not viewed
Yeah, I
as
don't like it either, but
definitive end all thing, right?
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. It's just like I don't want to take up so much time. People have hands up. Just if somebody
Yeah.
else wants to just set up that meeting, great. If not, I'll do it.
Either you or I, whoever gets to it first. David, you had your hand up.
Yeah, quick question. Is there a reason why there's no mesh resource that you bind to a mesh instead of a service?
So there are two reasons. The first one is there's no mesh. The first one is that when we kicked around the idea of a mesh resource early on, we couldn't really think of a good reason to have it. And the second one is that if you want to use an HTTP route to talk about policy, for example, then binding everything to a mesh doesn't actually work. You need something a little more specific than that.
Can you elaborate on the last bit?
Say again?
Can you elaborate on that last bit? Because I heard if you have an HTTP route and you want to bind a policy to it, then I lost you.
I can fill in the gaps.
There are actually, even there's kind of two different things we can break down, right? One of them is, as an example, within Linkerd, you can associate authorization policy with an HTTP route. And if all of the HTTP routes are just associated with a mesh, then that doesn't help you very much for authorization policy if you're trying to talk about authorization for workloads to talk to a specific workload. And in the general case, there's also the oh god, I'm going to get this backwards between producer and consumer routes, aren't I? Mike is waving his fingers like, yeah, you're going to get this backwards, Flynn,
Yeah. So
you have to be able to
basically,
control.
because
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. You need some sort of way to bind to, like, you can configure an HTTP route to route stuff to backend pods with like backend ref, or sorry, I know that's the whole across my words here. Yeah, it's difficult to phrase right. You need something that fulfills like the front end role of service, which is associating the root configuration with like a cluster IP and the actual like in cluster DNS that things are calling to get that cluster IP. And then also the like default backends. So like the pods that service targets. And like it's the kind of thing that I think long term Tim is interested in splitting up. But right now, service fills both of those needs. We have discussed the mesh resource as a potential like analog to a gateway class or something like that as a place for like global mesh configuration to live. But we need something more granular than that for binding the actual rules too.
We can, if you look back in the meeting notes, you should find a fair amount of stuff where we talked about this. Keith?
Two things. One, I wanted to also add that there's in the, I think it's Get 1324 maybe. But I think that the first Get describing the what and why for service mesh, we actually have an alternatives considered with the pros and cons list on the Gateway API website. That might be useful for having some context for why we didn't go for a mesh resource binding approach. The other thing that I wanted to say, this came to me as hearing folks discuss, and I don't expect to get to closure on this today. It's a much bigger conversation, but I almost wonder if, for those of you who might not have been at KubeCon, Tim did this lightning talk over, essentially where he proposed the idea that Gateway becomes the new service front end. I wonder if getting service out of Gamma, getting service out of the mesh of Gateway API's mesh support depends on Gateway becoming the new service front end.
I think it depends on something becoming a new service front end.
Yeah.
I was kind of wincing because I feel a little
Service
weird about,
2.
yeah, I feel a little, no, new service, come on. I feel a little weird about Gateway becoming something like a service because the semantic of a gateway spanning administrative domains, I think, is relevant. I think we need a thing in both the, blah. I believe that the semantic of here is a thing that spans administrative domains should be separate from here is a thing that, collects a bunch of endpoints into a single thing you can talk to within Kubernetes. So I do not think those should be the same kind of thing. And I think Gateway does a beautiful job of expressing that semantic of crossing admin domains. And so I personally tend to think that we should probably not co-opt Gateway to be a service. But yeah, I think there are definitely problems with binding directly to services and things like that, and we should figure something out about that. Sadly, I did not get much of a chance to catch up with Tim at KubeCon, and so I'm sorting out how to catch up with him a bit over Zoom. And of course, that's always easy.
In some ways, it's the endpoints that matter, right?
Only in some ways.
So.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there.
Anything else on the whole graduation thing before we?
That's the name of this initiative. It's the graduation thing.
Thang, yeah, THANG.
Okay.
Very important you spell that correctly.
Trademark it. It's now that's the official name.
I love it.
Yeah, there we go. All right, so Mike, you were talking about possibly doing retries natively on HTTP route.
Yeah, that
so
seems like
rudely cut you off to talk about the graduation thing. TM.
Yeah, so that seems like a somewhat lower hanging, more achievable thing now that we kind of have a pattern for having done that with the timeouts work. So I am very much interested in moving that forward as a way to enable more meshes to push more users towards using Gateway API and Gamma things.
I think that would be great.
Cool.
And I was going to say that in the Envoy Gateway project, one of my colleagues, Alice, actually, she and I went through, okay, mostly she, a little bit of I, went through and looked at the things the emissary input language can do that Gateway API cannot do. And I will see if I can track that down, because not all of those are things that fit the mesh case, but many of them are. And it's also interesting to look at solely because of the length of the list, really. And so that's a thing that I will track down. Actually, I wonder if I can easily track that down. All right, this is a Google Doc, so let me make sure that Alice is good with having it shared more widely. It is, yeah, let me make sure that she's okay with sharing that more widely before I go and post it to the Gamma group. But
Sounds good.
yeah,
Yep.
it was useful.
I mean, yeah, a survey like that of things we should potentially consider caring about, always worthwhile. Especially if
We
we like
tried-
have production use cases of people using them and depending on them.
We tried to we were mostly looking at emissaries mappings compared to HTTP route, because that's where a lot of this configuration stuff overlaps for those two projects. And we tried to make certain that we were focusing mostly on things that were relevant as opposed to historical accidents and emissaries input language. But I just checked to see if see what she thinks, so maybe we'll get an answer shortly. Retries, though, retries are 100% on that list. They are absolutely table stakes for API gateways or for service meshes. We need a way to do it. I
Let's
am
get it
becoming,
done. It seems like a very tractable
Yeah.
problem at this point.
and also I'm becoming more and more convinced that using policy attachment for things that are table stakes is not the way we should be doing things.
Yeah, we're still, I agree 100%, and we are still at Kong, like, not investing in policy attachment because
There
As
there
was alluded to in
are
the main Gateway API meeting last night, like as part of figuring out what other resources of Gateway API can be promoted and get stable, like
Mhm.
finding it seems like policy attachment is still uncertain, like despite how much we've iterated on it, how much we've tried to simplify it. So yeah, that kind of leads me to the next thing of Auth-Z. I think one of the unique things about it is that it's not just binding to a single
Keith,
thing,
thanks.
it needs to establish relationships between multiple things represented by an identity of some sort. I am tentatively curious if it could have it not be an implementation of, but have a structure similar to something like reference grant. Whoever is screen sharing, you are sharing your full screen, just so you know.
Oh, for crying out loud. Really?
So yeah,
I see your Fairly Odd Parents gifts.
I'm sorry, what? You see my what? Oh, yeah, you saw the Trello board. Awesome. All right, is that better?
you're good.
Yeah. Wow, glad I didn't have anything really embarrassing on my screen.
But yeah, Auth-Z things like the vague ideas. This is like a problem that's going to probably take a longer term and more work than just getting retries in. But I'm curious if it could be a new resource potentially. I'm curious if it could look something like an authorization grant modeled after like a similar structure to reference grant. I
That's a good one to
think that
talk
there is a
about.
way to make it a first class thing that does not jump through the policy attachment hoops and is hopefully simpler than existing implementations. And I know that there's also one of the things is I want to make sure that it is optionally able to support L7 policy, but that is not required. Specifically, I'm thinking of some use cases that only support L4 policy for Auth-Z. One of them that's in front of my free now is Istio Ambient, where it's an extra level of work to be able to support L7 by deploying a waypoint. So I want to make sure that it's possible if you need it, but that also just L4 policy is something that is natively easy to configure in a relatively straightforward way.
So what do you think the next step is there? Do you want to write a GEP? Do you want to get people together to heckle? Do you want to
I would like
burn
to
the remainder of this meeting talking about Auth-Z, which, I mean, there's nothing else on the agenda. We can do that.
I feel like we've spent a lot of time talking abstractly about it.
Mhm.
What I would like to do is probably start drafting a GEP with at least like the use cases that it should support. So
Mhm.
the like Shane's been really good at this of like pushing GEPs towards the like what's the problem we're trying to solve and why before we start
Yeah.
like training on the implementation.
Mhm.
And then I would also like to kind of collect existing examples of how other meshes are currently implementing Auth-Z. So I've seen Linkerd's approach. I'm familiar with consoles. I'm gonna dig up Istio's, and if anyone wants to contribute on behalf of Kuma or other meshes, I would love to start collating examples to kind of come up with what's the common core that we should be able to do.
I think that sounds like a great idea. I'll also point out two things about Linkerd relative to the rest of the world that I think are relevant here. One is we don't really trust L4 for much of anything. So it is possible to write an authorization policy that talks about a CIDR range. We almost never use it except for things like allowing kubelet probes, because those are coming from outside the mesh, for example.
Ooh, I
What
was
we tend
considering CIDR range things as like an L3 thing that is specifically
okay,
outside of the scope that I want to solve.
that makes me feel better.
The extent of what I'm thinking of for L4 is basically allow all service-based identity, or not service-based, so like identity-based authorization. So
Okay,
if
so
you
that's
have
good.
a cryptographic identity of some sort, whether that be a what's the key one, a service account,
Right.
or like a spiffy identity, something like that, being able to just basically allow traffic from that identity to your other thing.
Yeah. Okay, cool. The other thing that I was going to point out is that historically Linkerd has only dealt with service accounts, or more accurately with X509 certificates generated based on service account tokens. But we announced at KubeCon that we will be doing Spiffy. So we could, it would be nice to do both of those, but maybe focusing on Spiffy first isn't a terrible idea.
Spiffy first is or is not a terrible idea.
I don't think that it would be a terrible idea from my perspective at this point. I don't know if it gains us much to focus on only one of them.
I think that whatever implementation looks like, it should support multiple options. These are seem to be a service account based thing and a spiffy thing seem to be the two most common implementations. I know there's a long tail of some other stuff too. Like I think AWS has some IAM role type identity.
I don't know what that looks like at all. Do you?
I do not. It's a thing that we have extensibility bucket with at least two widely requested needed things.
Yeah.
What order we get those in or the exact implementation details, I think we'll figure out what that looks like.
Cool.
But yeah, send me your examples of Auth-Z thing in your respective meshes.
Excellent. Thank you. We add to the notes on that one. Oh, never mind. Somebody else is adding exactly the thing I was going to add to the notes. All right. Anything else? Do we actually get to end early again?
Sounds spiffy.
All right, somebody has to come up with something so we don't have to end with a god awful Shane pun. No, I think
Closing meeting.
yeah, exactly. Shane, you should just drop your mic and log out right after that. Thanks very much, everybody, for showing up. Mike, looking forward to the gap. As soon as I find out that Alice is okay with sharing stuff, I guess I'll stick a link in this document and maybe I'll post something in the Slack. But I'll at least put a link here and off we go.
Cheers, everybody.
For setting expectations, I probably do want to focus on retries first. That seems like a more tractable thing, immediate.
Sounds good to me.
And the work that Shane's doing to like get things stabilized, promoted, etc. And you probably won't see a gap for off-sea things before the new year, but I will start kind of collecting background things for it.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Talk to y'all later.